There's a monthly publication called Biblical Archaeological Review. And the founder might have even been Jewish, Herschel Shanks. And the purpose of the magazine is to discover the ancient world in light of the Bible, and to see how much we can learn from archaeological sites and with their relationship to the Bible. One of the fascinating finds of the 20th century are a set of scrolls found in the Judean desert. They're called the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the Qumran sect scrolls. And one of the major characters of the reestablishment of the Second Commonwealth, in fact, the major one, was a man by the name of Ezra, Ezra the scribe, Ezra HaSofer. And there's one of the major books in the Ksuvim, in the later writings, attributed to Ezra. He had a friend, an associate by the name of Nehemiah ben Chachaliah, who helped him establish the Torah as the way of life for those returnees who came back from Persia. And the question that the people of BAR, Biblical Archaeological Review, have is that why in the Qumran scrolls is there hardly a reference to Ezra? The implication being, of course, that maybe Ezra was a made-up scroll that came later, after the temple was destroyed. Much like the biblical criticism where they want to say that the Torah was written in pieces around the 6th century before the Common Era, at least some of the Torah, and most of the books were written at the end of the First Commonwealth or between the First Commonwealth and the Second Commonwealth. Without a shred of evidence, of course, but they want to impute their ideas into the history of the Bible. A lot of people who preceded me have debunked those claims, but I wish to address this question of the great magazine BAR, Biblical Archaeological Review. Who were the Qumran sect? Of course, Christians wanted to say that they were proto-Christians. They were really going to believe in the ideology of the Christians later on because the Christian sects came from them, without real evidence for that. But for many years, the first 40 or so, almost 50 years of holding hostage these Dead Sea Scrolls, this was the intent, this was the hope of the Christian scholars, that they would discover somehow a connection between the Jews during the Second Temple period and the Christian belief system. Of course, that's impossible. The Christian belief system was created 300 years after the destruction of the temple, and there's no connection between the original Christian belief system and the belief system of what became the Catholic Church and subsequent movements of Christianity. There is no recognizable connection between them except the belief in Jesus Christus. Not the belief in him as God or the Son of God, but a belief that he was the Messiah and so on and so forth. That's the only connection that they might have. But the tenets of the belief are new. There's nothing in the original Christian doctrine that is anything like what comes out of the Gospels or what's coming out of the church even the church fathers at their origin. The reason being is that the Christians were essentially associated with the Essenes. The Essenes were a group of pious Sadducees, or the followers of Zadok. Zadok was one of the students of Antigonus Ish Socho, and he rebelled against Antigonus's teachings, and he created his own ideology. You see this from Antigonus's major students, Yochanan ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan. They were the students of Antigonus, and also from Shimon HaTzadik, and they promoted belief in the oral law and the scholars of the day. Zadok denied the primacy of the scholars. He denied that there was an oral tradition that had to be learned, and you could only base further verdicts of new cases based upon the previous cases of the oral law. He opined that there's no such thing as an oral law. There's only the scripture, and you have to figure out what the scripture says about the new case. And only people who were highly qualified, like the teachers of righteousness, they relegated the priests as the teachers of righteousness. They didn't allow anybody else to teach, and that's where Jesus and John the Toivler, John who went to mikveh every day, Yochanan HaToivel. Baptism means going to mikveh, in case you didn't know. So it was Yochanan HaToivel. Yochanan would go into the mikveh every day, and you call him John the Baptist because you've distorted what going to mikveh is. So Yochanan and Yeshu, they opposed the priests being the only interpreters of the law. They wanted that merit or that position for themselves. But they were followers of Tzadok who did not deny the oral law. Well, guess who was the champion of the oral law? You guessed it, Ezra. Ezra set up the men of the Great Assembly, from which the oral law was all established. Another point in their negativity toward Ezra was that Ezra was a high priest. And he held 3 different positions at one time. He was the high priest. He also was the secular leader. He was the representative of, not of Rome, representative of Nineveh. I'm sorry, not Nineveh. Persia. What's the name of the city? Susa, Shushan. He was a representative of Shushan Habira. He's a representative of Koresh, of Cyrus the Great. So he was the chief governmental officer. He had all the military power necessary from the Persian government, Persian Empire, to force his opinion on other people. Plus, he was the president, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the High Court. He had all 3 positions at one time. And his successors, Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Just, also was a Kohen Gadol, who was considered the chief official by the Persian Empire. And he, of course, was the head of the High Court. And because of this, the Kohanim grabbed, not all Kohanim were pure of motivation as Ezra and Shimon HaTzadik. They saw in this an opportunity to grab power, to grab resources, to become wealthy on the backs of others. And they presented the argument that just as Ezra was the high priest and the head of the high court and the head of the secular government, the priests should have all of those titles. They should be the head of the secular government, the head of the religion, ministering the religion, and the head of the high court, giving their opinions of what law is supposed to be. And that created a monster. The priests then denied the oral law and took it upon themselves to establish their own laws. In actual practice, there were very little differences and distinctions between the regular law by the Perushim or the Pharisees and the laws that were promoted by the Sadducees. But there are certain real distinctions. Pesach, according to them, never came out during the week. It only came out on Shabbos. So it didn't make a difference which day of the month it was. It had to come out on Shabbos. That's how you got Easter Sunday, because Shabbos became Sunday through the Lateran Council. So Easter comes out, and it's because Easter is really Pesach. That's what Easter really is. It's a Yom Tov Pesach. And the Sadducees, the Tzaddukim, believed that Pesach had to come out on Shabbos. Of course, that's not the law. Pesach comes out on the 15th day of Nisan, whenever that comes out, whether it's on Shabbos or Friday or any other day. The rabbis established the calendar a way that neither Monday, Wednesday, or Friday could be Pesach. So Pesach could never come out on a Friday, but it could come out on Shabbos. But the Lateran Council decided that Shabbos had to be Sunday to make a difference between themselves and the Jews. At any rate, the oral law had the tradition that Pesach was the 15th day of Nisan, the same day that it happened, the miracle happened. Another thing is that we didn't go out on Shabbos. Pesach never happened on Shabbos. It happened on a Thursday. Talmud was filled with that. So why would you celebrate on Shabbos? It didn't happen on Shabbos. At any rate, the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees were very slight, depending upon how the Sadducees interpreted the verses of the Torah. So the Essenes, the Qumran sect, they were Sadducees. They didn't believe in an oral law. Who strengthened the oral law? Who established the oral law? Ezra. Ezra and his court, the men of the Great Assembly. Furthermore, they were against the priesthood. They were against the centrality of the priesthood. Ezra, because he had all three offices, as did Simon the Just, initiated a period, an era, in which the priests considered themselves the heads of the government as well, and wanted to dominate the high court, which they couldn't. The high court rebelled against that, and the priests tried to fight against the high court to no avail. But they did control the government for a long time. In fact, the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, when they did the rebellion, their only sin was, after the rebellion was successful, they should have restored the Davidic dynasty. And they didn't. They felt that the dynasty or the rulership should belong to them. They're the Kohanim, they're the teachers of righteousness. They're the ones who should tell us what to do. Of course, that's against the law. And that's why all the Hasmoneans died. At any rate, the one who set up the centrality of the priesthood, not consciously but inadvertently, was Ezra, because he carried the office of the high priest, the secular government, and the head of the high court, the head of the Sanhedrin. He had all three titles, as did Simon the Just. And that caused the priests to want to believe that they had to have authority. And all three branches of Jewish life, the temple, the secular, and the judicial. Thankfully, it didn't last that way, but there were people who felt that Ezra was the one responsible for that. And on these two counts, The Qumran sect would not accept Ezra as a teacher of the Torah, just as the Samaritans. Yeah, you remember them, so-called Good Samaritans. They're known as the Shomanim and also as the Kutim. They came from Kuta, which is a city in northern Iraq. And these Kutim converted to the Jewish way of life, except that their teachers were from the 10 tribes of Israel. The 10 tribes rejected the Davidic house, the Davidic dynasties. Who was responsible to establish David as the king? That was Samuel, the prophet Samuel. So any book in the Tanakh that goes after the book of Judges, starting from the book of Samuel, was rejected. Because from the book of Samuel and other books, it is clear that the ones who are supposed to be the kings of Israel forever are only from the house of David. And of course, the northern kingdom, the 10 lost tribes, they rejected that. They were the teachers of the Samaritans, and therefore the Samaritans never went past the book of Judges. The book of Samuel was no good, because it went against their belief, against the house of David. And just as with the Shomanim, they don't have the books after Samuel and later, so too the Qumrans did not accept Ezra because of the oral law, and that he was a Kohen, and he helped the Kohanim try to be in control of everything. And they rejected both of those things and didn't want to accept Ezra as an authority figure.